Hi everyone, my name's Matt, and today I'm going to show you a Linux-based steam machine I built in a 3D printed case meant for home theater couch gaming. If you don't know what a steam machine is, then let me quickly get you up to speed. See, back in the mid-2010s, Gaben and the boys over at Valve hatched a plan to try and take some of the large console market. They would make an operating system called steamos, and partners like Alienware and Gigabyte would make the hardware to run steamos called Steam machines. These Steam machines, along with the Steam controller, were positioned to bring PC gaming to the living room. Now, at the time, gaming on Linux wasn't in a great place, and due to a number of factors, this project ended up being basically a complete failure. But not all hope was lost, as Valve was able to take a lot of the ideas from this project and use them in the Steam Deck, which as many of you know has been a massive success. With the relatively recent release of SteamOS and other SteamOS-like operating systems, it means you can now build your own custom Steam machine, and not only is it possible, but gaming on Linux has gotten so good that in many cases you can get better performance than you would in Windows. Because of all this, I decided to build a custom Steam machine from the ground up to see what the experience of using a gaming PC as a console is like in 2025, so let's get into it. When starting this project out, I decided the first part I would pick would be one I usually pick last, which is the case. See, because this is a console replacement PC, I decided I wanted to use a case that would resemble a console. Now, I've used a couple of these types of cases in past videos, and there's also some really nice ones currently on the market, like the Fractal Design Ridge, but I decided to do something a little more special. See, back in 2013, Valve created and sent out a few hundred prototype Steam machines as testing units in these cool console-style cases. Now, there's no way I would have been able to get my hands on one of those original ones, but thanks to a YouTuber named Stand Up Gamer, I'm able to get somewhat close to the real thing. See, he created and has released the files for a 3D printable version of that prototype Steam machine case, so I decided to grab the files and try and print/assemble one for myself. This case prints in 10 or so pieces, and I printed them all out on my X1C 3D printer from the sponsor of today's video, Bamboo Labs. This printer has been absolutely amazing, having no trouble printing all the parts necessary for this project in ABS, which is a material a lot of printers struggle with. Bamboo Labs makes printers that just work. Setup is extremely quick and easy, and it does all the calibration and leveling itself. I have the X1C with the AMS system, which can be used for printing with multiple materials or colors in a single print, but for me, I love it as it allows me to easily switch between material types without having to load and unload filament all the time. Now, the X1C is definitely one of Bamboo Labs' more high-end printers, but they have options like the A1 and A1 Mini, which are great entry points into the world of 3D printing, and if you don't care about printing in materials like ABS and ASA, then the A1 is an awesome option, bringing you all the Bamboo Labs quality of life features like auto bed leveling at a more affordable price. If you're interested in a Bamboo Labs printer, now is a great time to grab one, as all their printers are currently on sale until July 15th. They're up to 40% off and are the lowest price they've been all year, so make sure to check them out, linked in the description down below. So to print out all these parts took around 19 hours of print time and a little under half a kilogram of filament. Because the finished size of this case was a fair bit larger than a standard 3D printer bed, it means the larger parts had to be split up, printed separately, and then reattached by me. The creator of this case used jigsaw style cutouts that are meant to be hammered together, but I found that if you're using a printer that prints dimensionally accurate parts, this design doesn't work as intended, as these joints end up having a lot of play and slop in them. Not the end of the world, but it is worth noting. The case assembles into two main parts: the bottom that comes in 4 pieces, which all of the PC components mount to, and the top panel that comes together in 5 pieces. To assemble these pieces, I started by supergluing the parts together, which creates a decently strong bond, but I knew I wanted something that would create an even stronger bond and hopefully fill some of the gaps, so I took some scrap ABS from support material and old prints and dissolved them in acetone to create what people call ABS glue. This can be painted on to both fill the gaps and chemically weld the paints together, as acetone is a solvent that can melt ABS plastic. The next thing to do was install the threaded inserts that the PC components will attach to, and also the magnets that'll hold the two main case pieces together. I had to size up a lot of the heatset inserts, as again this case was designed, from what I can tell, to be printed on a printer that kind of over extrudes filament. So I added the 4 threaded inserts for the motherboard, then I added 2 for the power pass-through, then 2 for the GPU mount. Next, I added 4 for the front button power assembly, and finally 4 more for the front panel USB ports. With those in, I could move on to the magnets, which I tried to super glue in, but realized the holes were way undersized for the recommended magnets, which was a little frustrating. So then I tried to kind of heat set the magnets in place with my soldering iron, and learned the valuable lesson that high temps can actually end up destroying the magnet's magnetic properties. So eventually, after hollowing out the holes with my soldering iron, I did get new ones in there with super glue. Then I went and sanded down the top panel a bit to get it ready for painting. I was only going to paint the top panel and the front of the bottom panel, as that's all you're really going to see. And the main goal was to mostly hide the jigsaw marks, but as you'll see, I wasn't super successful with the paint job. I started by applying a sandable primer, doing a few coats on each piece, and then sanding it down a bit before adding a few coats of black paint, trying to go relatively light with each coat. Then finally, I added a few coats of matte clear coat and masked off the front panel to add a strip of semi-gloss clear coat to match the original Steam Machine's front panel. This is my first time assembling and painting a 3D print like this, and while it didn't turn out great, I learned a lot and realized to get the finish I was originally hoping for, I should have spent way more time using filler, sanding it down, then also more time adding primer and sanding it down, as you can still completely see the jigsaw lines, and the overall finish isn't great, but I felt it was good enough for now to move on to assembling the rest of the machine, as I could always go back in the future and refinish it if I wanted. The last part of the case to put together was the power button assembly. It prints in 3 parts. The first is the main mount that has room for you to insert and pressure fit in a PC power button, along with 2 5mm white LEDs. I took these LEDs and soldered them to a few wires and 2 jumper cables to make this makeshift power LED cable that I could plug into the motherboard. With the power button and LEDs in, I could mount this piece to the front panel with 4 screws into the threaded inserts. Then there's this button piece that I printed in translucent PETG and glued this black filler piece into. This has clips that press into the main power button mount, and pressing this piece in and out actuates the switch. And then finally, after adding the front panel USB, it meant the case was complete. I think it looks decent from afar, but once you get up close, it's pretty easy to see the poor paint job. With that being said, it's fine for now, as I can always come back and refinish it in the future, and it's time to fill this case with some PC hardware and do some Linux gaming on it. I wanted to build a mid-range price to performance PC in here. Originally, I wanted to stay around the price of a PS5 Pro, but I did end up going a few $100 above that, so let's talk about the part selection. For the CPU, I was split between going AM4 and AM5, but after doing the math, I realized it's really not all that much more expensive to go AM5 these days, so I decided to go with the AMD Ryzen 5 7500F. You can grab these for around $140 on Newegg, which is a solid price, as these perform very close to the 7600 and even the 9600X, with the only real downside being the lack of integrated graphics. With 6 cores, 12 threads, and boost clocks of up to 5 GHz, this is all you really need for mid-range gaming, especially if you're targeting AAA high-resolution gaming. The CPU is going into the cheapest AM5 ITX board I could find, which is the Gigabyte A620i AX. For 135-ish bucks, you're getting some nice features like front panel USB-C support, built-in Wi-Fi, and support for everything that we need. The only major downside I see with this board is the fact it only has a single M.2 slot. See, many ITX boards have a slot on the front and one on the back, but this one just has a single slot at the front. Back panel I/O is decent, and overall this board worked out perfectly fine for this build. To cool this CPU, I was originally planning to use a low profile cooler that I had on hand, but at the last minute realized I didn't have the AM5 mounting hardware for it, and just ended up pivoting to a basic Wraith Stealth cooler. This is basically just a hunk of aluminum with a fan attached. It looks alright, but generally speaking, it's not a great idea to pair these with AM5 CPUs. With that being said, I was interested in how well this cooler would fare with the 7500F. Next up is memory, which for a build like this, I think you really want to go for 32 gigs of RAM, and at under $80, you're able to get this Silicon Power Value Gaming DDR5 kit running at 6000 MHz CL30. This is great price to performance RAM and will work great in this build. 32 gigs is more than enough for modern gaming and should be for many years to come. For storage, if I was going to be running this system long term, I would probably go for a 2TB drive, but to keep the budget under control, I went with a 1TB drive in the form of this Crucial P310 with heatsink. This is a solid budget Gen 4 drive that offers plenty of performance in a gaming system like this one, and the included heatsink means we won't have to worry about thermal throttling. 1 terabyte should be enough for a system like this, especially to get up and running, but because you don't have the option to add another NVMe drive later down the line, I think for many people going for 2 terabytes out of the gate might make more sense. Now let's talk about the GPU. I didn't take much time to think about this one as I knew I wanted to go AMD for the superior Linux gaming support, and I was lucky enough to snag a 9060 XT 16GB at the $350 MSRP on launch day. This will be my first time trying the card out, and I'm excited to see how it performs. This 16GB of video memory should be very nice for both modern AAA gaming and future AAA gaming. I got the Sapphire Pulse model and picked this one specifically because it was the smallest 9060 XT at MSRP that I could find. I'm not a big fan of the recent trend of making every GPU absolutely massive, and because I wanted to use this in a variety of systems, I thought going for a dual fan model like this one would be my best bet. It requires one 8-pin PCIe power connector, and as you may or may not know, 9060 XTs only include 3 video out ports, which is kind of odd for a GPU that many people are paying upwards of $400 for. With that being said, getting a solid graphics card with 16 gigs of video memory for a decent price is definitely not something to take for granted in our current wacky GPU market. To power this system, I needed an SFX power supply and ended up using this 650 watt 80 plus gold rated unit from FSP that I had on hand. I don't necessarily recommend this one right now because it's overpriced, and unfortunately it seems like all SFX units are really price inflated right now, with you having to spend like $125 minimum to get a decent unit. 650 watts is more than enough for this system, and having a modular design in a small form factor build like this is a must in my opinion. The total price for all these parts minus the case is around $900, which is a few hundred above the PS5 Pro, but it should perform better and give you an actual upgrade path. Assembling the system was pretty straightforward. The only really non-conventional things are the fact the GPU mounts with a riser card and the way the power supply gets plugged in. See, the case is designed to use one of these pass-through cables, but because the GPU is taller than a reference design, it won't mount in as intended, so I just had to have the pass-through cable hanging out the back like a tail, which works fine but definitely is far from ideal. Also, I did end up switching the Wraith Stealth cooler for a low profile Thermalright cooler as the stock AMD cooler was just slightly too tall. After a few minutes of cable managing, the top was able to go on and the physical build was done. When you look up close, the finish isn't great, but taking a step back, it does look very much like the original Steam Machine prototype, and shout out again to Stand Up Gamer for the design, all of the case and his channel linked in the description. It's not perfect, but for a free case, it's absolutely amazing and way better than what I would have been able to design. With the physical build done, it meant it was time to install an OS and some games. Now, I would have loved to use an official SteamOS image, but unfortunately, from my understanding, RDNA 4 GPUs like the 9060 XT aren't currently supported in SteamOS, but lucky for me, there are other options. I decided to go with Bazzite, which seems like a very popular and well-documented option. Heading to their website, it asks you select what hardware and use case you have for the system so that it can give you the right ISO. Once the ISO is downloaded, I went ahead and flashed it to a USB drive using Balena Etcher. Then I took the flash drive over to the Steam Machine, which I did the setup with a keyboard and mouse. Installing Bazzite was surprisingly simple and really wasn't any more difficult than installing Windows is. Then once installed, all I had to do was sign into Steam and start installing games. The whole process was very easy to do, and the vast majority of my games are able to be played on Linux. You can even install games from Epic, GOG, and Amazon through what's called the Heroic Launcher. To actually test these games, I decided to bring this Steam Machine to my living room and hook it up to my TCL QM7, which does have 4K 120Hz capabilities. Also, if you're wondering about the size, here it is next to my PS5. And also, I think it fits in very nicely in a home theater environment like this one, looking just like a console. To interface with this Steam Machine, I'm using this 8BitDo controller I got on sale for like 20 bucks, and that works really well. It uses a 2.4 GHz dongle, which is definitely preferred over Bluetooth, at least for me. And once you turn the system on, it's like you're using a console. You have a big, simple interface for selecting your games, and overall seems like a very polished UI experience. I didn't test a ton of games, but I did test a decent variety, so let's talk about general performance. In Elden Ring, I tested at 4K with the high preset and was very happy to see a basically locked 60 FPS, which looked and felt amazing. I wasn't sure how well the system would handle 4K gaming, but in Elden Ring, it worked surprisingly well. Next, I tested The Last of Us Part 2 at 4K high settings. I wasn't able to figure out if FSR is actually supported or not because a ton of the settings were locked and I wasn't able to change them, but hopping into the game for a short bit, I saw the FPS stay in the 70s most of the time, which again was super solid performance in my opinion at 4K. In Monster Hunter Wilds, I use the benchmark tool at 4K with the medium preset, which does use upscaling, and I also disabled frame generation. Doing this resulted in the FPS staying above 60 the majority of the time, and during the most intensive parts, it was still staying in the 50s the majority of the time, which if you know how unoptimized this game is, you know is pretty darn good. In Cyberpunk, which I ran through GOG, I again tested at 4K but at the medium preset using the built-in benchmark. Doing this resulted in a very good 100 FPS average, which yes, this preset does use upscaling, but it still looked great in my opinion. Next was Borderlands 3, which I tested at 4K medium and using the built-in benchmark. Doing this resulted in a 79 FPS average, which was very good. Finally, I tested Black Myth Wukong at 4K with the high preset and 50% resolution scaling. Doing this resulted in a spot-on 60 FPS average, which is good for this game in my opinion. Overall, performance on this $1,000-ish Steam machine is surprisingly good. Being able to play these games at 4K, many of them native res with 60 plus FPS is great. I think saving up some more money for a 9070 XT wouldn't be a bad idea for higher FPS and settings, but I would have no problem playing any of these games tested with the visuals and performance I saw. In terms of temps, they were also very good, with the CPU maxing out in the high 60s and the GPU maxing out in the low 70s when gaming. Noise-wise, the system was audible when the audio was muted, but with the sound on, it wasn't noticeable at all. All in all, I consider this project a success and was pleasantly surprised at how good of an experience PC gaming in the living room is now in 2025. The finished job on this case isn't great, but again, unless you get up close, it looks fine, and I can always go back and refinish the top panel in the future. With that being said, I'm interested to hear what you guys think of this build and this project. Would you consider making a system like this for living room gaming? Let me know in the comments below. So yeah guys, I think it's time to wrap this video up. Thanks again to Bamboo Labs for sponsoring this video. You can check out their awesome line of 3D printers in the description. If you like this video, consider giving it a like and subscribing. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.